Now we're going to read the Khan Academy article on Machu Picchu, incredible Machu Picchu. It was written by Narael Hohenze. Machu Picchu is often described as mysterious, but in fact a great deal is known about its construction and purpose. It was built as a royal estate for the first Inca emperor, Pachacuti Inca Yupanqui, in the middle of the 15th century on a mountain saddle overlooking the Urubamba River in modern-day Peru. The location was approximately 3 days' walk from the Inca capital of Cusco and nearly 3,000 feet lower in elevation at 7,972 feet or 2,430 meters, with a pleasant climate. It was intended as a place where the Inca emperor and his family could host feasts, perform religious ceremonies, and administer the affairs of empire, while also establishing a claim to land that would be owned by his lineage after his death. The site was chosen and situated for its relationship to the Andean landscape, including sight lines to other mountain peaks called apus, which have long been considered ancestral deities throughout the Andes. The site contains housing for elites, retainers, and maintenance staff, religious shrines, fountains, and terraces, as well as carved rock outcrops, a signature element of Inca art. There's a beautiful photograph of this incredible place. The site features architecture, from houses to terraces, built by carefully fitting individual stones against each other. Terraces were a common element of highland agriculture long before the Inca. They increased the arable land surface, that's the land that can be farmed, and reduced erosion by creating walled steps down the steep sides of steep mountains. Each step could then be planted with crops. Terracing took advantage of the landscape and provided some sustenance for the emperor and his entourage during his visits, as well as producing ritually important maize crops. Further provisions came from the rich lands at the foot of the mountain peak, which were also beholden to Pachacuti and his family. Water management at the site was crucial, and throughout Machu Picchu, a system of stone channels drains water from rainfall and from a spring near the site. Some of the water was channeled to stone fountains. Here is a picture of one of these channels. There are 16 in all, descending in elevation through the site. The first in the series is placed outside the door of the emperor's compound. That fountain is constructed with walls that may have created a ritual bath for the emperor, connected to his duties as a sacred king who performed religious rituals. The construction of the main buildings is typical of Inca elite architecture. The walls were built of stones that had been individually shaped to fit closely with one another, rather than being shaped into similar units. This was accomplished by a laborious process of pecking at the stones with tools, gradually shaping them so that each stone was uniquely nested against those around it. Each stone had some sides that protruded slightly and some with slight concave faces, socketing the stones so that they held together, but allowed for earthquake damping movement in this seismically active region. Outward faces were then worked smooth so that the walls resemble an intricate mosaic. Most structures were roofed with wood and thatch. Entryways were in the unique Inca shape of a trapezoid rather than a rectangle. The trapezoid shape was also used for niches and windows in the walls of buildings. Buildings for people or activities of lower status were made using a rough construction technique that did not take the time to shape the stones. So in the photograph that we see right here, we see these would have been for high status people. We see the shaped stones of all different sizes that have been smoothed off. We also see the trapezoidal windows that are in the that help to provide stability for earthquakes. The emperor and his retinue would only reside at Machu Picchu for part of the year. Most of the people who lived there permanently were Yanaconas, retainers, and Mitimayas, colonists obligated to move to their location. Graves at Machu Picchu have yielded evidence that many of the Yanaconas there were craftspeople, including metalsmiths who came from all over the empire. The ability to command people across the empire and to oblige them to work for the Inca nobility was an expression of imperial power. The buildings of Machu Picchu clearly show the social divisions of the site, with most of the high status residential buildings in a cluster to the northeast. The emperor himself lived in a separate compound at the southwest of the site, indicating his unique status as the ruler. The observatory, let's get a picture of that. The observatory, this part right here, was adjacent to the royal residence, emphasizing the relationship between the elites, religious ritual, and astronomical observation, including the Emperor Pachacuti's claim as both a descendant of the sun, whom the Inca called Inti, and the sun himself. One of the obligations of the royal family was performing rituals that sustained relationships with the natural, supernatural forces that drove existence. The number of religious structures at Machu Picchu is high, indicating that Pachacuti and his lineage were heavily involved in the religious functioning of the empire, a task that underscored his right to rule. Also called the Temple of the Sun, the observatory's purpose is echoed in its unique shape. It is composed of two main parts: an upper carved stone enclosure with windows and niches placed in it, and a cave beneath this structure with masonry additions that hold more niches. Modifications of the windows in the observatory's upper walls indicate that they were used to calculate the June solstice, as well as the first morning rise of the constellation Pleiades and other important constellations. The cave beneath the enclosure may refer to the place of the underworld in Inca myth, making the observatory a building that embodied cosmological thought as much as it facilitated astronomical observation. So once again, the sun would come into one of these windows on one of the solstices, and then the cave that is down underneath is underneath this part right here, and that has those niches as well that were just described. So now we're going to look at the part of Machu Picchu that is up higher, called the Intihuatana. And that's this right here. The Intihuatana, also, which means the hitching post of the sun, is a carved boulder located in the ritual area of the site to the west of the main plaza. Carved boulders were a part of the Inca relationship with the earth and expressions of a belief in a landscape inhabited by supernatural forces. Carved boulders of this type are found throughout the heart of the Inca Empire. The stone's name refers to the idea that it was used to track the passage of the sun throughout the year, part of the reckoning of time used to determine when religious events would take place, and similar to the observatory.